Greetings, my fellow Americans and future subjects. Your Emperor is here to address some concerning things I have witnessed lately in your country. An uprising in white supremacy, or should I say an uprising in overt white supremacy. Before I go on to condemn the actions of those who have partaken, I would like to give a brief lesson on race and racism in America. So to start, I'd like to go over a few key vocabulary terms. First is race, which, from a sociological standpoint, is defined as the color of one's skin. The next term I'd like to go over is ethnicity, which is defined as the country of origin, where someone's heritage is traced back to. And the last term I am going to define at this time is racism. Racism is the systematic oppression of a group based off of their race, hence their skin tone. Now, what is a systematic oppression? America has had many systems of oppression throughout its history, since the days of slavery, to keep the white in power. Now, keep in mind, when I say the white, I am not describing every single white person. This is a generalization, and it is the systems that benefit them. I am not trying to call all white people racist. Now that that disclaimer is out of the way and you've now flooded my thing with comments, saying that I am a horrible person, we can now continue on with my lesson. So some of the key systems of oppression that America has used have been the system of education, the system of wealth, the systems of property ownership, which actually would fall under wealth, systems such as prisons and police, the government itself. These are all systems that have been used to oppress those of color and minority groups throughout all of American history and have benefited those of the white race. Now, it appears that white supremacists feel that they are being oppressed, that there is racism towards them, a concept that is being defined as reverse racism. Now, if we are to continue on with the idea that racism is a systematic oppression, then there must be a system in place for reverse racism to also exist. So, I ask you, what systems are in place to keep the white man down? I do not have the answer to this question. I am genuinely asking you, my viewers. If you find yourself to be a white supremacist, a Nazi, whatever it is that you go by, I want you to tell me, what is this system that oppresses you? How is this system oppressing you? And where does this oppression come from? If you cannot answer this simple question, then you have to yield the notion of the existence of reverse racism. This, however, does stem into another interesting idea of privilege, something many people do not realize they have. Now, just being white in America, you are privileged. It does not matter where you were born, what economic status you were born into. Statistically speaking, a white person and a black person born into the exact same circumstances, the white person will have a higher quality of life in America than the black person will. Just on the sheer merit of they were lucky enough to be born with a specific skin tone. For example, when it comes to job applications, traditional black-sounding names often do not make it past the resume phase, whereas a white-sounding name is much more likely to get an interview. Now that we have addressed a little bit of history and a little bit of sociology behind racism, the recent actions that have been taking place in this country are deplorable and are honestly a tragedy, an inhumane tragedy. But this is not new. As I stated previously, this is the rise of overt white supremacy, the return of overt racism. For the last several decades, arguably since the time of segregation, since the Obama administration, we were living in the era of covert racism. The KKK, the Nazis, what have you, was still here and was still active, but they were underground, covert. People were still suffering by their hand. During the Obama administration, we witnessed the return of overt racism, which is when these racially driven groups returned to the spotlight and began acting again. We saw the lynchings and the burnings of the effigies of Obama. We once again put the camera on these groups and brought them back into this limelight. They never went away, and that is something you need to understand. This is not a new day, America. We are just now looking at this thing that has been living inside of you for decades, centuries even. Now, under my regime, I would have crushed these groups. The KKK, the neo-Nazi factions, as far as I am concerned, these are enemies in America's history. Anyone from the Confederate flag to the Nazi Party, those were the enemies of America and should have been stomped out of the nation. I am not inciting violence, however. I condemn the spilling of blood on our own soil, and on any soil for that matter. I believe in peaceful communication and education, which is why the beginning of my address was a lesson. With proper education, it is possible to combat these. These are social concepts. You cannot go to war with a social concept. All you can do is challenge that social concept. And the people who have adopted the social concept must then take your new information, and they must either accept it or reject it. Regardless of what they do, you have given them the new ideas that they need to understand. And that is how change begins. Violence continues violence. Education continues education. So, as I had stated earlier, if you have disagreed with what I am saying, I want you to challenge me. I want you to tell me why you think I am wrong, and I will read what you write, and I will have a conversation with you. Because that is truly the most effective way to deal with this, through open communication in which both parties are willing to listen and willing to try to understand what the other is saying. So I ask that if you come at me with your ideas, you are willing to accept mine in return, and we may have that conversation. So, in conclusion, I condemn these rallies that incite violence. And I find that since reverse racism is not an actual systematic oppression, it cannot exist. And therefore, the white supremacist party should not feel oppressed. Their motivation is unknown to me, since there is now no logical course for them to follow. in this world that I am envisioning. So as I have said, please challenge me with your ideas. I am a man of education, and I want to understand all of my subjects. So, please stay tuned for future addresses from your future Emperor. Viva la Emperor!